Hey, welcome to this radio video, and this is the Solar Activity Propagation Report number 5 for July 10th, 2014. This is a weekly look at what was happening and what should happen in solar activity and propagation conditions. So we've had a great week for propagation, and thanks to a lot of solar sunspots that were, going through the sun's surface. If we look here, these are what they look like this morning. As you see here, the biggest threats are still there. 2109, 2108 are really big sunspots. These look still very impressive. There's been a flood of pictures on the web of actually the sun, pictures of the sun at sunset, where you can actually see the sunspots because they're so big. For most of the week, solar flux has been quite high. We've been really playing around the 200 mark compared to last week when I did my report number 4 last week. We had a solar flux of about 175, and we were expecting it to go a little higher. And it stayed around 200 pretty much from the weekend until today, Thursday, which is really nice because having a solar flux around 200 and a K index that kind of stayed pretty much at 3 or below all week enabled for really good propagation on the shortwave bands. And higher frequencies were propagating really well. And actually, if you looked at some of my videos, I've been logging 50 megahertz signals from the Atlantic. I've logged the Azores and even heard a very weak, but it was there, a station from Canary Islands. And so this is amazing. And sporadic E, although giving possibility of such long distance propagation, I suspect that some of that propagation is due to the very high solar flux that ionized the ionosphere enough that propagation was actually skipping up to 50 megahertz. So really nice propagation, great conditions. This morning I was listening to KBS World Radio. It's a little weaker than usual this morning. I usually get it at about S9, S9 plus 10 when it's good. This morning it's S5 to S7 on my meter, which means that there's a little disturbance, a little bit of disturbance. Maybe the solar flux is a little lower. One of the things that I noticed is that even though the solar flux numbers give an idea of the propagation on shortwave, it's you don't take it for the truth of what is actually propagation conditions. I've noticed that when we are on the decline of sunspots where the solar flux is lowering, it seems to be lower than what is actually here. So it could be that solar flux has been really dipping now. So past week was good. We had a few disturbances. K index went up to 3 at some times, but didn't really reach more than that. Another thing that happened, we had a M flare this week. So the M flare actually came from an unusual region, and that's the funny thing about the flare, is that the M flare actually M.6.5 flare came from AR 2113, which is not actually one of the spots that was expected to flare. And if we look here at the sun again, 2113 is that little clumple of spots here that really don't look that impressive when you compare them to these big sunspots here. 2109, 2108, 2107, even 2104 is more impressive. All week they were announcing flares, flares, flares from this little group here, and nothing happened. And we're seeing more and more increasing chances apparently. So if there are flares today, Thursday, or tomorrow, Friday, that could be totally normal. We could, there's some slight chance that we could even have very big X flares. One of the things that happened when the M flare erupted was a radio blackout that lasted about an hour on the sunlit side of Earth. And actually, if you go on the spaceweather.com website, you can hear the static from the sun here. There's a nice little video here where you can hear the effects of the sun. When the sun is erupting, it often sends bursts of radio signals in the HF frequencies around 20 megahertz or up. And here there are there's a 2-minute audio sample here on the website for that were recorded in stereo on 23 megahertz and 21 megahertz. It's always worth it to listen to. Gives you an idea that the sun actually does send out radio signals in the HF spectrum. So what do we expect for the weekend coming now and the week ahead? Well, one of the thing is these big sunspots are slowly rotating off the sun's Earth side disk. So they're slowly going away, and so the solar flux should actually lower. Solar flux, which is at 198 this morning, will probably drop down to about 170, 160 by next Thursday as the sunspots are actually leaving. So expect solar flux values to drop. Expect, as the sunspots are moving out, the HF propagation conditions on the high frequencies to be maybe a little less interesting than they were, but nonetheless, as long as it's above 100, I think propagation in general should be good. What we are really looking for is any solar flares. If there are M or X solar flares from these regions, we'll have radio blackouts while the flares are actually going on. And the coronal mass ejections from these, even though it's not centered, if we have, a solar flare and a coronal mass ejection from 2108, 2109, we will be in the path of that cloud probably. And what is going to happen is we'll have the radio blackout as the flare comes, and then we'll have geomagnetic conditions that are going to actually, geomagnetic storms or aurora borealis as the coronal mass ejections come towards Earth and reach Earth 2 or 3 days later. So take a peek at this. Check spaceweather.com. If you see any news of flares, you know that in the next few days afterwards, there could be some geomagnetic activity that's going to actually deteriorate our radio signals on HF. And but as long as there's no flares, actually conditions are pretty quiet. So no flares and a higher solar flux index means that HF propagation should be quite good. K index should remain quite low. There could be a little bit of unrest from actually the M6 flare. So no indications as of yet that we should actually receive any from that little cloud of particles that left that solar flare. So basically, I expect quiet conditions unless we have a big solar flare, which it's increasingly, because if we look here at space weather, they do say that NOAA forecasters do estimate 75% chance of M flares. That's a very, very big chance, but the thing is, they've been expecting flares for the past week, and there haven't been any. And the one that actually erupted wasn't even on the spots that they are looking at. So pretty interesting. But do check that because we have big sunspots, and chances are high that some solar flare will happen today, tomorrow, or maybe through the weekend. No solar flares. Expect propagation to be quite good. It's been an amazing time in the past week for signals. I mean, high frequencies. Radio New Zealand 15720 coming in, booming in here in the evening around midnight local here, which is 0400 UT. And general propagation has been quite good, and as we are still in the very big and long days of summer in the northern hemisphere. And take a peek at the different websites that I actually look at. dx.qsl.net, check for the solar indices. Check for solarham.com, which is solarham.net, sorry, which is another great website where they have really, up to the minute updates of what's happening on the sun, and great little reports of what to expect. And space weather, which is, in my advice, one of the easiest to understand website for people that aren't very scientific minded or technology minded. It's easier to understand. They try to put it more down to earth type of information. Here is, by the way, one of the great um, pictures taken from a sunrise, and you see the sunspots right in the middle of the solar disk, and that's not even using any magnification. It's quite amazing. Shows you how the sunspots are quite big on the sun right now. So hope you enjoy these reports, and that you'll be checking in every week for the new report that we will be getting out. And hope everybody enjoys great propagation conditions. So thank you for watching. Send me threes.